In the dim glow of ancient seas, long before continents would collide or mountains would lift their jagged crowns into the sky, the world stirred with forces older than memory, older than bone, older even than time measured by human minds. Imagine the Earth more than 3.5 billion years ago, a planet shrouded in volcanic exhalations, its skies heavy with clouds of methane and sulfur, its oceans warm and mineral-rich, trembling with the energy of a young and restless globe. It was in these waters, dark, churning, ceaselessly shifting, that life flickered into being, not with a thunderclap, nor with a divine proclamation, but with the quiet inevitability of chemistry refining itself through endless cycles. To trace the story of evolution is to trace the slow awakening of this flicker into flame, to follow the thread from the simplest self-replicating molecules to the towering diversity of creatures that would one day carve symbols into stone, build ships to chase horizons, and look back upon the fossilized remnants of their ancient kin. No witness from our species saw that first stir of life, but the evidence was etched into the oldest rocks long before the first storytellers gathered around fires. Stromatolites, layered structures built by primitive cyanobacteria, rise in the fossil record like monuments from an era when the only architects of the earth were microbes. Their patterns, rippled like the frozen breath of tides, tell of colonies that once trapped sediment and sunlight, slowly altering the atmosphere with every exhalation of oxygen. This transformation unfolded over millions upon millions of years, yet its impact reshaped the entire destiny of the planet. The air thickened with oxygen until iron dissolved in the seas reacted and fell in rusty layers onto the ocean floor, forming bands of ore miners still unearthed today. With oxygen's rise came catastrophe for countless organisms adapted to an anoxic world. Yet from that catastrophe came opportunity, a pattern evolution would repeat across the ages. As the oceans brightened with this new chemical potential, life diversified, experimenting with shapes and strategies only the realm of microbiology could contain. For nearly 2 billion years, the world belonged exclusively to single-celled organisms, their battles and alliances invisible to any future eye, but no less dramatic for their scale. Some merged to form mitochondria, those tiny powerhouses whose bacterial ancestry can still be traced in their DNA, a relic of one of the most consequential partnerships in the history of life. Others developed the first cytoskeletons, internal scaffolding that allowed cells to grow larger, adopt new shapes, and engulf their neighbors. Evolution, in these early epochs, was a slow sculptor honing its craft, accumulating innovations that would later make animals, plants, fungi, and every other multicellular organism possible.
Then, in the deep seas of the Proterozoic, the first multicellular bodies appeared. Soft, enigmatic shapes settled onto the ancient seafloors during the Ediacaran period, their impressions preserved like ghostly signatures in sandstone. They were not plants, not animals, not fungi, at least not entirely as we know them. They were experiments, quilted, frond-like, disc-shaped, alien in anatomy, yet familiar in their persistence. Some researchers theorize they absorbed nutrients directly through their surfaces, lacking digestive systems or nervous networks. Others propose more active lifestyles, with movement so subtle it left no trace. Whatever their nature, they marked the beginning of a new evolutionary trajectory, one in which cooperation among cells gave rise to bodies capable of coordinated growth and specialization. But it was in the Cambrian period, roughly 541 million years ago, that evolution erupted with a fervor unparalleled in earlier ages. The fossil beds of the Burgess Shale and Xinjiang capture the breadth of this explosion. Trilobites with compound eyes glittering like arrays of crystal lenses. Anomalocaridids with their great grasping appendages sweeping through the water in search of prey. Early chordates with the first primitive backbones gliding through the currents like ancestral shadows of every vertebrate to come. Eyes evolved in multiple lineages, and with them came the revolution of sight. Predators honing their pursuit, prey refining their escape, ecosystems shifting with every innovation. Evolution, propelled by competition and change, began weaving the intricate web of interactions that would come to define life on Earth. As oceans teemed with new forms, plants made their first tentative steps onto land. At first, the continents were barren stretches of rock and sand, shaped only by wind and rain. But microscopic algae and fungi formed symbiotic partnerships, breaking down stone into soil and paving the way for the earliest terrestrial plants. These pioneers, simple moss-like organisms, clung to damp environments, their existence modest but transformative. As they spread, they altered the planet's albedo, its atmosphere, its water cycles. By capturing carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen, they nudged the climate into cycles that would eventually favor even more ambitious forms of life. In time, plants developed vascular tissues, allowing them to grow taller, transport water from root to leaf, and harden their stems into woody trunks. Forests rose, casting shadows across landscapes previously exposed to the full glare of the sun. With forests came the first complex terrestrial ecosystems, and in their shade, insects evolved wings, gaining access to the sky long before vertebrates would dream of flying. Dragonflies with wingspans approaching a meter patrolled ancient swamps, their size made possible by higher atmospheric oxygen levels. Millipedes longer than human legs slithered through leaf litter, their segmented bodies testaments to evolutionary routes taken by arthropods when the world was young and humid.
Amphibians emerged next, descendants of lobe-finned fish, whose fins gradually transformed into limbs strong enough to support weight on land. Their vertebrae stiffened, their rib cages expanded, and their skulls adapted to capture prey outside the buoyant cradle of water. They were travelers between realms, returning to ponds and lakes to lay their eggs, their reliance on moisture keeping them tethered to aquatic sanctuaries. Yet their presence on land signaled a profound transition. Vertebrates were no longer confined to the seas. Then, in a series of evolutionary steps that unfolded over tens of millions of years, some amphibian lineages evolved desiccation-resistant eggs, freeing them from dependency on water for reproduction. These were the first amniotes, ancestors of reptiles, birds, and mammals. Reptiles, with their scales and sturdy eggs, spread across the continents, their limbs carrying them far from the watery margins that constrained their amphibious predecessors. They diversified into countless forms, from small, lizard-like insectivores to towering archosaurs that dominated ecosystems long before dinosaurs claimed prominence. The Permian period bore witness to ecosystems rich with diversity, from sail-backed dimetrodons regulating their body temperatures through vast neural-spined sails, to the burrowing dicynodonts, whose tusked faces hint at the facial musculature that would later characterize mammalian kin. But Earth does not offer stability for long. Around 252 million years ago, volcanic eruptions in the region now known as Siberia released torrents of lava and gas, destabilizing climate systems and triggering the most catastrophic mass extinction in the planet's history. More than 90% of marine species vanished, along with a devastating proportion of terrestrial ones. It was a crucible, and from its ashes rose new lineages poised to inherit a changed world. Among the survivors were the ancestors of dinosaurs, creatures that began modestly but expanded into ecological roles abandoned by the fallen. As the Triassic period unfolded, these early dinosaurs competed with other archosaurs, gradually gaining advantages in posture, respiratory systems, and metabolic rates. Their limbs shifted beneath their bodies, granting efficient movement. Their lungs evolved air sac systems, allowing continuous oxygen flow. When the Triassic ended with another extinction event, dinosaurs stood as the dominant large vertebrates, ready to transform the Mesozoic era into their age. During the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, dinosaurs diversified into forms both immense and delicate. Sauropods stretched their necks toward treetops that swayed hundreds of feet above the ground. Stegosaurs brandished plates that may have served both thermoregulatory and display purposes. Theropods, those agile, predatory hunters, developed feathers long before birds would take to the air. These feathers, at first simple filaments, evolved into complex structures that offered insulation, display, and eventually aerodynamic potential.
Meanwhile, small nocturnal creatures scurried beneath ferns and conifers, early mammals, perhaps overlooked by towering reptiles, but quietly refining traits that would one day shape entire faunas. They developed more sophisticated hearing through the repurposing of jaw bones into middle ear structures. Their teeth began to differentiate into incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, better suited to processing varied diets. Fur offered insulation for warm-blooded metabolisms, and parental care grew more elaborate, laying groundwork for the behavioral complexity mammals would later display. But the Mesozoic's wane was not eternal. 66 million years ago, on a day like any other, a massive asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula with force equivalent to billions of atomic bombs. Forests ignited, tsunamis swept coastlines, and dust choked the atmosphere, halting photosynthesis. The non-avian dinosaurs vanished, as did many marine reptiles, ammonites, and countless other species. Yet, in the aftermath, a lineage of small feathered dinosaurs endured, the ancestors of modern birds. And with the giants gone, mammals surged into newly vacant ecological niches, embarking on a diversification that would reshape the Earth once more. From the smoldering aftermath of the asteroid's impact, Earth entered an age of renewal in which sunlight gradually returned, forests reclaimed ash-laden clearings, and mammals, once confined to nocturnal niches, expanded into daylight realms that had been inaccessible for over 150 million years. These early mammals, some gliders, some burrowers, others nimble climbers, began experimenting with body plans that would one day give rise to ungulates thundering across plains, whales plunging into oceans, primates leaping among branches, and eventually a species capable of contemplating the entire sweep of evolutionary history. But for now, in the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, their narrative unfolded quietly, defined not by grandeur, but by persistence, adaptation, and opportunity. Forests spread across much of the globe, dense and humid, forming arboreal labyrinths where primates began to refine traits that would later define their lineage. Early primates such as Tailhardina and Narcarctus darted along branches with grasping hands and forward-facing eyes that enhanced depth perception in complex, three-dimensional environments. These early adaptations, born of necessity within the canopy, laid the foundations for the extraordinary cognitive development that would characterize their descendants. Meanwhile, mammals on the ground diversified at astonishing rates. Hoofed creatures developed specialized joints and teeth to exploit newly emerging grasslands, which themselves arose as global climates cooled and forests receded. As the Eocene gave way to the Oligocene, vast climatic shifts reshaped entire continents. The formation of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current cooled the planet, contributing to the spread of grasslands that favored fast-running grazers and the predators that pursued them. Horses evolved from small, multi-toed forest dwellers like Eohippus into larger, fleet-footed animals, built for sprinting across open plains. Their limbs elongated, their toes fused into single sturdy hoofs, and their teeth developed high crowns capable of grinding tough, silica-rich grasses. These transformations exemplified evolution not as a story of linear improvement, but as an ongoing dialogue between organism and environment, where each adaptation opened new possibilities and closed others.
In Africa's forests, primate evolution continued, branching into lineages that would lead to monkeys, apes, and ultimately humans. The Miocene epoch witnessed the flourishing of hominoids, early apes, who ranged from Asia to Europe to Africa, leaving behind fossils that capture their diversity. Proconsul, for example, lacked a tail and possessed traits that foreshadowed the flexible shoulders of modern apes. Gigantopithecus, towering over 3 meters tall, roamed ancient forests with formidable jaws adapted to chewing fibrous plants. These primates did not march along a predetermined path toward humanity. Rather, they represented a sprawling family tree with many branches, most of which would eventually wither, leaving only the lineages that could adapt to rapid environmental change. One such lineage, the hominins, emerged around 6 to 7 million years ago. Their earliest representatives, such as Sahelanthropus chadensis and Aurorin displayed a tantalizing mixture of ape-like and human-like traits. The position of the foramen magnum, the opening where the spinal cord meets the skull, suggested bipedal tendencies, a hint that walking upright began earlier than once believed. This shift toward bipedalism may have been driven by changes in habitat, as forests fragmented into a mosaic of woodland and savanna, compelling our ancestors to traverse open ground where standing upright provided advantages in spotting predators, regulating body temperature, and freeing hands for carrying food or offspring. By the time of Australopithecines, around 4 million years ago, bipedal motion had become a defining characteristic. These hominins still retained long arms suited for climbing, but their pelvis, femur angles, and knee structures reveal a gait remarkably similar to ours. Fossilized footprints at Laetoli in Tanzania preserved in volcanic ash, show individuals walking side by side, their stride lengths and foot arches echoing the modern human form. These silent imprints capture a moment from deep time when our ancestors walked across a landscape alive with elephants, rhinoceroses, and large predators, navigating a world both familiar in shape and alien in its inhabitants. As the Australopithecines thrived, another lineage diverged, the first representatives of the genus Homo. Homo habilis, known from fossils in East Africa, displayed increased brain size compared to earlier hominins, and is often associated with the Oldowan tool tradition, simple stone flakes used for cutting meat and processing plant material. These tools signify a profound shift in behavior, enabling early humans to expand their diets and enhance their survival in unpredictable environments. The ability to modify the environment through technology, however rudimentary, set Homo apart and initiated a feedback loop in which dietary changes influenced brain development, social cooperation, and cognitive complexity.
Homo erectus, emerging nearly 2 million years ago, embodied evolutionary boldness in both anatomy and behavior. With a tall, slender frame, adapted for long-distance endurance running, a brain larger than any previous hominin, and mastery of Acheulean hand axes shaped with deliberate symmetry, Erectus became the first human ancestor to migrate out of Africa. Their fossils appear across Asia, from the island of Java to the hills of Georgia, marking a geographic expansion unparalleled among earlier hominins. This dispersal was not random. It reflected adaptability to diverse climates, dietary flexibility enhanced by the probable use of fire, and social structures that sustained groups across challenging terrains. As hundreds of thousands of years passed, evolution continued weaving its branching tapestry. Neanderthals emerged in Europe and Western Asia, their bodies robust and powerful, adapted to cold glacial environments. Their noses broadened to warm, frigid air. Their bones thickened to support immense muscle mass. And their cultures developed complex behaviors, including burial practices, personal adornment, and refined stone tool industries. Far from the brutish caricatures once depicted in early science, Neanderthals represented a successful and intelligent human species, with a long history spanning more than 300,000 years. At the same time, in Africa, Homo sapiens began evolving features that would eventually distinguish them: lighter skeletal frames, high foreheads, rounded skulls, and an extraordinary capacity for symbolic thought. Genetic evidence suggests our species emerged around 300,000 years ago, gradually forming networks of exchange and communication that allowed innovations to spread between groups. Beads carved from shells, pigments used for body decoration, and tools shaped from bone reveal a cognitive richness that paved the way for language, art, and increasingly complex social structures. When modern humans encountered Neanderthals and other archaic humans, such as Denisovans, their interactions were not solely violent or competitive. Genetic studies reveal interbreeding, leaving traces of archaic DNA in modern populations across Eurasia and Oceania. These genetic contributions influenced immunity, metabolism, and even adaptations to high-altitude environments. Evolution, rather than a series of isolated paths, was a vast network of interactions among closely related species, whose exchanges left enduring marks on the genomes of their descendants. As Homo sapiens spread across the globe, reaching Australia by 65,000 years ago, and the Americas by at least 15,000 years ago, they encountered ecosystems shaped by millions of years of independent evolution. Giant marsupials roamed Australia. Mammoths and mastodons grazed the northern hemisphere. Enormous birds, reptiles, and mammals inhabited island landscapes unaccustomed to human presence. The arrival of humans often precipitated rapid ecological change. Sometimes agriculture emerged around 12,000 years ago in multiple regions independently, from the Fertile Crescent to China to Mesoamerica. This shift from foraging to farming transformed human societies, creating settlements that grew into cities, economies, and civilizations. But it also influenced evolution in subtle yet profound ways. The domestication of plants selected for traits such as larger seeds, sweeter fruits, and non-shattering grains. Domesticated animals evolved alongside humans, adapting to new diets, environments, and social structures. Meanwhile, humans themselves evolved lactose tolerance in certain populations, resistance to diseases that thrived in crowded settlements, and genetic adaptations influenced by new diets and lifestyles. Yet evolution never ceased operating in the present. Bacteria continued to evolve antibiotic resistance, their rapid reproduction enabling genetic changes that outpace medical interventions. Insects adapt to pesticides with alarming speed. Urban wildlife, from pigeons to coyotes to insects, evolves traits suited for city environments, such as altered behavior, coloration, or tolerance for pollutants. Even human populations show ongoing adaptation, whether through physiological responses to climate, genetic traits favoring high-altitude living, or resistance to diseases like malaria. But the full sweep of evolution is most vividly preserved in the fossil record, which reads like a chronicle carved into stone. Trilobite eyes record the dawn of vision. Petrified ferns capture the rise of terrestrial life. Ammonite spirals trace the history of marine ecosystems for over 300 million years. Each fossil is a snapshot of an organism caught between the vastness of time and the immediacy of its own brief life, a reminder that evolution is not abstract,
but embodied in creatures that lived, hunted, hid, grew, reproduced, and died in worlds both familiar and utterly foreign. Through these preserved remnants, we can reconstruct not only the organisms themselves, but the environments they inhabited, the climates that shaped them, and the evolutionary pressures that sculpted their bodies. Consider the articulated skeletons of early whales, whose transition from land to sea represents one of evolution's most remarkable transformations. Pachycetus, with limbs built for running, waded through coastal shallows hunting small prey. Ambumocetus, the walking whale, pushed itself through water with powerful hind limbs. Basilosaurus, serpentine and fully aquatic, surged through ancient oceans with elongated vertebrae and vestigial hind limbs barely larger than paddles. Each stage captures evolution's ability to reconfigure anatomy for entirely new modes of life, not by sudden leaps, but through countless incremental modifications that accumulate over millions of years.
Similarly, the evolution of birds from theropod dinosaurs illustrates how innovations built for one purpose can become repurposed for another. Feathers may have originated for insulation or display, yet they gradually adapted into aerodynamic structures capable of generating lift. The fossil Archaeopteryx, with its blend of avian and reptilian traits, teeth in its beak, claws on its wings, a long bony tail paired with feathered plumage, stands as a testament to transitional forms that bridge evolutionary chapters rather than divide them. In later lineages, the fusion of tail vertebrae into a pygostyle, the development of keeled breastbones for flight muscles, and refinements in wing geometry trace the incremental journey from gliding or flapping prototypes to the mastery of the air. Evolutionary transitions also appear in the origins of major groups like tetrapods, whose earliest representatives show the transformation of fins into limbs capable of supporting weight on land. Fossils such as Tiktaalik reveal wrist-like bones, robust ribs for breathing air, and a mobile neck absent in fish, but crucial for terrestrial life. These intermediate creatures were not half fish, half amphibian in any simplistic sense. Rather, they were perfectly adapted to the shallow water environments of their time, with traits that would later serve as foundations for new evolutionary avenues. The same principle unfolds in the lineage of elephants, whose ancestors once included small, pig-sized creatures with modest tusks and short trunks, living in environments ranging from African forests to Asian floodplains, before giving rise to mammoths, mastodons, and modern elephants. But evolution's story is shaped not only by gradual change, but by catastrophic interruptions, mass extinctions that erased dominant lineages and cleared ecological space for new ones. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction devastated marine life. The Devonian extinction reshaped early vertebrate evolution. The Permian event nearly sterilized the planet. The Cretaceous impact ended the age of giant reptiles, paving the way for mammals. Each crisis forced life to rebuild itself, often in surprising directions. After the Permian extinction, for instance, the ancestors of modern corals, which once relied on skeletons of calcium carbonate, emerged with new strategies for reef building that transformed marine ecosystems for millions of years. The interplay of geology and biology is also evident in continental drift. When the supercontinent Pangaea fractured, isolated populations diverged through allopatric speciation, giving rise to unique faunas. Australia's marsupials evolved into forms occupying ecological roles filled by placental mammals elsewhere. Kangaroos echoing antelopes, marsupial lions mirroring large predators, and koalas taking on niches dominated by arboreal herbivores in other regions. Madagascar's lemurs diversified into species with varied diets and behaviors due to the island's isolation, while South America fostered giant ground sloths, terror birds, and early primates long before the Great American Biotic Interchange reshuffled its ecosystems.
Even the smallest organisms wield evolutionary power. Cyanobacteria transformed Earth's atmosphere billions of years ago, while viruses continued to shape the genomes of all life through horizontal gene transfer. Mitochondria originated from bacteria engulfed by early eukaryotes, forming a symbiotic relationship so essential that the descendants of both organisms fused into a single inseparable lineage. Chloroplasts, too, came from ancient symbioses, enabling plants to perform photosynthesis and fuel nearly all modern ecosystems with the energy of sunlight. These cellular partnerships underscore that evolution often proceeds through cooperation as much as competition. Genetic evidence allows us to trace lineages back through deep time with remarkable precision. DNA comparisons reveal that humans share roughly 98.8% of their genome with chimpanzees, highlighting not closeness in physical form, but shared ancestry stemming from a common ancestor around 6 to 7 million years ago. Yet even more distant relationships can be discerned. Similarities between human and yeast genes demonstrate that fundamental cellular processes have been conserved across hundreds of millions of years. The universality of the genetic code, shared by bacteria, oak trees, whales, and humans, attests to the deep unity of life, a continuity stretching back to primordial replicating molecules that laid the foundation for all biological diversity. This continuity becomes even more evident when examining how traits evolve. Consider the eye, often held up historically as irreducibly complex, yet now understood through the comparative anatomy of countless species. Light-sensitive patches in simple organisms provided rudimentary advantages long before lens structures emerged. Over time, depressions deepened into cups, narrowing fields of vision but increasing directionality. Transparent proteins condensed into lenses capable of focusing light. Even now, nature displays eyes in every stage of sophistication, from the simple photoreceptors of jellyfish to the compound eyes of insects to the acute vision of hawks, whose retinal cells are packed so densely they surpass human acuity several-fold. Evolution also shapes behavior. Social insects like ants and bees evolved complex colonies where individuals specialize in tasks that ensure the survival of the group. This cooperation arises through kin selection, in which traits that favor relatives spread because relatives share genes. In vertebrates, behavioral evolution manifests in parental care strategies, communication systems, mating displays, and the development of memory and learning abilities. Songbirds, for instance, pass down vocal patterns through cultural transmission, creating regional dialects that function as both identification and courtship tools. Whales encode migratory paths in social traditions, blending learned behavior with genetic predispositions.
As climate shifts, species continue to adapt in real time. Some undergo changes in size or coloration. Others alter migration routes or breeding timing. Peppered moths in industrial England evolved darker morphs to blend against soot-covered trees, then reverted to lighter forms as pollution decreased. In the American Southwest, pocket mice living on volcanic rocks developed dark fur through mutations in pigmentation genes, demonstrating how similar environmental pressures can drive parallel evolution in separate populations. The concept of convergent evolution further illustrates nature's tendency to find similar solutions to similar problems. The streamlined shapes of sharks, dolphins, and ichthyosaurs arose independently in unrelated lineages, shaped by the hydrodynamic demands of life in the open ocean. The wings of birds, bats, and pterosaurs evolved separately, yet served the same function of powered flight. Even the camera-like eyes of octopuses and vertebrates developed through distinct evolutionary pathways, each arriving at remarkably similar designs despite arising from vastly different ancestors. Speciation, the process by which one lineage splits into two, often unfolds when populations become isolated geographically or ecologically. Over time, genetic differences accumulate, eventually preventing interbreeding. Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands exemplify this process. As the birds dispersed across islands with different food sources, their beak shapes diversified in accordance with available resources. Some evolved stout beaks for cracking seeds, others slender ones for probing cactus flowers.
others long curved tools for extracting insects. Their evolution continues today, observed in real time as droughts and wet cycles alter the selective pressures that shape beak morphology. While natural selection is a primary engine of evolution, it is not the only force. Genetic drift can cause random fluctuations in allele frequencies, particularly in small populations. Bottleneck events, when populations shrink drastically, can amplify these random effects, reducing genetic diversity and influencing future evolutionary pathways. Founder events, where a small group colonizes a new area, produce similar patterns. These processes, though undirected, profoundly shape the genetic landscapes of species. Sexual selection, another evolutionary force, drives traits that enhance mating success, even at the expense of survival. The extravagant plumage of peacocks, the complex songs of birds, and the elaborate displays of many species arise from mate preferences that favor certain traits. Such adaptations, while sometimes costly, yet the forces shaping evolution extend beyond competition, drift, and selection. They weave into the fabric of geological and atmospheric change, forming a tapestry in which life and Earth reshape one another in an unending dialogue. When atmospheric oxygen rose during the Great Oxidation Event, countless anaerobic organisms perished, but others seized the opportunity to harness oxygen's potent energy yield, paving the way for large, complex bodies. When volcanic eruptions darkened skies and cooled global temperatures, entire ecosystems collapsed, but survivors carved out new niches in the unfamiliar landscapes left behind. Ice ages sculpted continents with glaciers, drove migrations across exposed land bridges, and isolated populations long enough for speciation to unfold in the quiet shadows of advancing ice sheets. Even the development of continents influenced evolutionary milestones. When South America drifted in isolation for tens of millions of years, it became a cradle for unique species, such as giant terror birds and sloths the size of elephants. Meanwhile, Africa's transformation from lush forest to expanding savanna millions of years ago placed new pressures on primate ancestors, encouraging bipedality, heightened social cooperation, and increased reliance on tools. Evolution did not chart a path toward any specific outcome, but responded tirelessly to each shift in climate, each rising mountain range, each opening habitat, each change in food availability or predation risk. Amid these transformations, flowering plants emerged around 140 million years ago, fundamentally altering ecosystems with their bright petals, nectar-filled blooms, and mutually beneficial relationships with pollinators. The coevolution of insects and flowering plants produced an explosion of form, orchids mimicking female bees, butterflies evolving proboscis long enough to reach deep floral chambers, symbiotic partnerships shaping the destiny of billions of species. Fruits evolved enticing colors and flavors to encourage animals to disperse seeds, and those animals, in turn, adapted digestive systems tailored to new diets rich in sugars, fibers, and chemicals. Entire food webs reorganized around these innovations, and the landscapes of the world, grasslands, forests, jungles, adopted new rhythms shaped by the flowering of angiosperms. These interconnected changes ripple through time in ways that can be read not only in fossils, but in the genomes of living species. Genes duplicated and diverged, forming families that enabled new biological functions. The Hox genes, essential for determining body plans, expanded through duplication events hundreds of millions of years ago, allowing vertebrates to evolve distinct regions, heads, necks, thoraxes, tails, that could then diversify further. Other gene families shaped the evolution of vision, smell, immune systems, and cognition. Evolution often works with the raw material of duplication, modifying copies into new tools while preserving the original function. This molecular flexibility allowed the transformation of simple ancestors into the immense diversity we see today.
The human story intersects with these molecular narratives in unexpected ways. Lactase persistence, the ability to digest lactose into adulthood, arose independently in multiple populations following the domestication of cattle, a striking example of cultural practices influencing genetic evolution. Populations living in the Tibetan Plateau developed genetic adaptations that allow efficient oxygen utilization at high altitudes, while Andean populations evolved different physiological strategies, demonstrating that similar pressures can produce divergent solutions. The sickle cell trait, harmful in its homozygous form, persists in certain populations because heterozygous individuals gain resistance to malaria, an elegant, if tragic, illustration of how natural selection balances costs and benefits. As humans continued to modify landscapes, from the earliest fires set to clear grasslands to the agricultural terraforming that reshaped entire river valleys, species around them evolved in response. Dogs emerged from the domestication of wolves, their genomes reshaped by selection for temperament and cooperation. Cats accompanied human settlements across continents, adapting to rodent-rich environments created by stored grain. Pigeons altered their plumage patterns in response to urban landscapes, while rats evolved keen intelligence and social structures capable of exploiting human-made environments. Evolution does not stop because humans build cities. Rather, it accelerates in new directions. Urban evolution leaves traces everywhere. Spiders in cities grow larger due to abundant prey. Plants evolve mechanisms to withstand chemical pollutants. Mosquitoes in underground subway systems develop genetic distinctions from their above-ground relatives. Even microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses evolve constantly, adapting to antiseptics, antibiotics, temperature changes,
and the complex interplay of human medicine and behavior. The rapid pace of microbial evolution demonstrates both the power and peril of evolution, as pathogens exploit every opportunity to survive and replicate. Beyond Earth's surface, genetic clues reveal unexpected relationships among species that once confounded taxonomists. Whales, for example, are more closely related to hippos than to any other living mammals, a fact illuminated by DNA long before fossil intermediates were discovered. Birds, genetically, are modern dinosaurs, sharing more with velociraptor-like ancestors than with any living reptiles. Hyraxes, small rodent-like creatures of Africa, turn out to be closely related to elephants and manatees. Molecular data reshapes our understanding of life's history, revealing that evolution's branches twist and converge in ways not always apparent from anatomy alone. And yet anatomy preserves astonishing historical imprints. Humans carry vestiges of their evolutionary past in structures like the coccyx, remnants of a lost tail, the plica semilunaris in the eye, echoing a third eyelid possessed by many other vertebrates, and goosebumps, a reflex inherited from ancestors whose raised fur made them appear larger or provided insulation. The recurrent laryngeal nerve, which loops around the aorta before reaching the
Patterns of embryonic development further reveal these deep connections. Human embryos briefly exhibit pharyngeal arches reminiscent of fish ancestors, though these structures develop into parts of the jaw, ear, and neck rather than gills. Whales begin development with hind limb buds that later regress, retaining only internal vestiges. Birds develop tooth buds that rarely erupt but hint at distant reptilian ancestry. Embryology offers a window into evolutionary history, echoing ancestral states through processes that unfold anew with each generation. The natural world, in all its abundance, carries echoes of these histories. Coral reefs, living structures built by tiny polyps, are constructive descendants of ancient reef builders whose forms changed through eras dominated alternately by sponges, algae, mollusks, and corals. Forest ecosystems maintain relationships forged over millions of years, plants relying on mycorrhizal fungi to absorb nutrients, birds dispersing seeds across vast distances, insects pollinating flowers whose shapes evolved to match their bodies. Predators and prey engage in arms races of speed, camouflage, toxins, and defenses that escalate through generations. Each adaptation answers a challenge posed by another species or the broader environment, creating dynamic evolutionary feedback loops. In island ecosystems, evolution often produces bizarre and spectacular outcomes. On the Galapagos, marine iguanas evolved the ability to dive into frigid waters to graze on algae. On Hawaii, honey creeper birds diversified into dozens of species with wildly different beaks suited to nectar feeding, seed cracking, or insect extraction. On Mauritius, the now extinct dodo
evolved a massive body, reduced wings, and fearlessness toward predators due to the island's long isolation, adaptations that proved disastrously maladaptive once humans arrived. Whether flourishing or collapsing, these island stories reveal how isolation accelerates evolution's creative power while rendering species vulnerable to sudden disruptions. In the oceans, evolution paints equally intricate pictures. Bioluminescent organisms communicate, lure prey, or confuse predators using chemicals refined over generations. Deep-sea fish develop enormous jaws, expandable stomachs, or transparent bodies to maximize survival in an environment devoid of sunlight. Squid evolve complex nervous systems and remarkable camouflage capabilities, altering color and texture in fractions of a second to evade predators or signal to mates. Coral polyps adapt symbiotic relationships with algae that fuel reef growth. Yet these partnerships falter when ocean temperatures rise, illustrating how delicate evolutionary balances can be. And throughout all of this, life continues to evolve in ways subtle and dramatic. Butterflies shift migratory patterns in response to climate change. Trees adjust blooming cycles. Fish in overfished regions.
Across countless generations, evolution molds creatures, not only in body, but in mind, sculpting instincts, problem-solving abilities, communication systems, and social behaviors that equip species to navigate their worlds. In crows and ravens, neurons clustered densely within their forebrains, enabling them to recognize individual human faces, craft tools from twigs, and even pass knowledge across generations. In elephants, memory becomes an instrument of survival, guiding matriarchs to long-forgotten watering holes during droughts. Octopuses, with distributed intelligence spread through their arms, exhibit curiosity, playfulness, and a startling capacity for escape and innovation within environments they never evolved to inhabit. Such behavioral complexity illustrates evolution's reach beyond bone and muscle, permeating the minds of animals shaped by the pressures of their ancestors' lives. These pressures often emerge from intricate ecological relationships. Predators and prey engage in evolutionary arms races, where each adaptation by one side prompts a counter-adaptation in the other. Gazelles grow faster and more agile. Cheetahs refine their explosive speed and flexible spines. Poisonous newts evolve potent toxins. Snakes develop resistance. Plants diversify their chemical defenses. Herbivores evolve enzymes capable of neutralizing them. These reciprocal changes create patterns of co-evolution that ripple through entire communities, establishing the dynamic equilibrium that characterizes living systems. Sometimes, evolution produces unexpected forms through path-dependent histories. The platypus, for example, retains primitive traits like egg-laying while displaying sophisticated electroreception for detecting prey underwater. Its genome reveals a mosaic of evolutionary influences, reptilian, avian, and mammalian traits layered across millions of years. Similarly, the axolotl, a salamander that remains permanently aquatic in its juvenile form, demonstrates neoteny, the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood. Such quirks of development underscore that evolution explores every available avenue, sometimes preserving ancestral traits, sometimes reversing pathways previously taken, and sometimes forging entirely new directions. The fossil record captures these unconventional experiments with life's forms. In the Cambrian seas, hallucinogenia skittered along the seafloor on spindly legs, its back lined with defensive spines. Wiwaxia crawled under armor plates and soft bristles. Opabenia hunted with 5 eyes and a flexible proboscis tipped with grasping claws. Though many such creatures left no modern descendants, their existence reveals evolutionary exploration at its most unrestrained, a period when no established body plans restricted the possibilities. Later eras continued this experimentation. The Carboniferous swamps hosted insects of giant proportions. The Permian deserts birthed synapsids with sail-like structures. The Cretaceous oceans harbored mosasaurs with double-hinged jaws and flippers shaped from limbs that retained traces of their terrestrial origins.
Even mass extinctions, though devastating, became catalysts for innovation. After the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction removed the dominant reptilian megafauna, mammals quickly diversified into shapes and sizes that had never before existed. Whales and dolphins returned to the sea. Bats colonized the air. Ungulates spread across continents. Primates filled arboreal niches once dominated by reptilian ancestors. Each lineage branched into diverse forms, some now extinct, others thriving, all tracing their origins to opportunities born from ecological upheaval. To understand evolution's mechanics, scientists examine not just fossils, but also the molecular engines driving change. Mutations, random alterations in DNA, generate variations that selection filters. Some mutations occur in regulatory genes that control development, allowing substantial morphological change with minimal genetic alteration. A shift in when or where a gene activates can stretch a bird's beak, alter a fish's fin pattern, or change the number of insect limbs. Evolution often modifies development itself, reusing ancient genetic instructions in novel contexts. This deep conservation is why creatures as different as flies, mice, and humans share homologous developmental pathways. Meanwhile, lateral gene transfer introduces genetic material between species, particularly among microbes. Antibiotic resistance genes may spread through bacterial populations not through mutation alone, but by plasmids shared between species. Even multicellular organisms bear remnants of ancient viral insertions within their genomes, some of which became essential to modern biological processes. The development of the mammalian placenta, for instance, relies on genes derived from retroviruses that once infected ancestral species. Evolution is not merely descent with modification, it is also descent with integration. Climate serves as both sculptor and executioner in evolutionary narratives. During the Pleistocene, rapid cycles of glaciation and warming forced species to track shifting habitats or perish. Woolly mammoths, adapted to frigid steppes with long hair, thick fat layers, and curved tusks for clearing snow, thrived during glacial periods, but dwindled as forests reclaimed the grasslands. Saber-toothed cats evolved jaws and elongated canines optimized for ambush hunting large herbivores, yet when megafaunal communities collapsed, their specialized traits offered little advantage. Meanwhile, species able to adapt to varied environments, wolves, ravens, humans, survived and expanded. Adaptability itself becomes an evolutionary advantage. Generalists often outlast specialists when the world changes suddenly, suggesting that flexibility can be a powerful survival tool in turbulent times. The raccoon, capable of thriving in forests, cities, mountains, or marshes, exemplifies this versatility. Likewise, the coyote's range expanded across North America despite human encroachment, a testament to behavioral flexibility and broad dietary tolerance. In contrast, the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, succumbed in part due to its narrow ecological niche, illustrating how vulnerability arises when adaptation cannot keep pace with environmental change.
But while adaptability serves some, specialization propels other species to extraordinary success within stable conditions. The koala, reliant on eucalyptus leaves, evolved specialized detoxification systems to handle the foliage's toxins. The giant anteater developed elongated snouts, sticky tongues, and powerful claws perfectly suited for termite mounds. The star-nosed mole honed one of the fastest sensory systems in the animal kingdom, using its fleshy appendages to identify prey in milliseconds within dark tunnels. These extremes highlight evolution's capacity to refine traits to astonishing degrees. Such refinements also appear in the plant kingdom, where the co-evolution of flora and fauna drives spectacular diversity. Carnivorous plants, such as Venus flytraps and pitcher plants, evolved in nutrient-poor soils, turning to insects for nitrogen that the ground could not provide. Their traps, lures, and digestive enzymes evolved gradually, shaped by the advantages of gaining nutrients for mobile prey. Meanwhile, grasses transformed landscapes with their tough, silica-rich stems and rapid growth strategies, sparking the evolution of grazing mammals equipped with ever-growing teeth and complex digestive systems that could process fibrous material. Migration, too, carries evolutionary significance. Animals that travel vast distances, monarch butterflies, Arctic terns, caribou, humpback whales, navigate using cues encoded partly in their genes and partly in learned experience. These migrations connect ecosystems across continents and oceans, shaping evolutionary pressures across entire biomes. Birds wintering in Africa and breeding in Europe must adapt to changes in two hemispheres. Salmon navigating between freshwater rivers and open sea evolve traits suited for both worlds. Sea turtles return to ancestral beaches guided by geomagnetic cues shaped by millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. Even extinction events reveal evolution's subtleties. When the dodo vanished, the Tambala coke tree on Mauritius, a species whose seeds once passed through the digestive tracts of these birds, suffered reduced germination rates. When wolves were removed from Yellowstone, elk herds grew unchecked, overgrazing willow and aspen stands and altering river courses. Evolution does not operate in isolation. Species depend on one another in ways that become visible only when those connections fray or break. Human evolution itself continues to unfold. In urban environments, some populations develop greater tolerance to air pollution. In colder climates, genes influencing thermogenesis shift in frequency. In regions with heavy pathogen loads, immune-related genes diversify. Cultural evolution, rapid changes in language, technology, and social norms interact with genetic evolution in complex, often unpredictable ways. The rise of global travel influences pathogen evolution. Dietary changes shape microbiomes with downstream effects on health. Technological reliance alters selective pressures in ways scientists are still striving to understand. Across all these examples, evolution remains ceaseless, weaving its patterns in the genes of every organism, sculpting ecosystems and responding to the unpredictable forces of climate, geography, and chance. The unfolding story encompasses deep time, microscopic processes, and the vast expanses of oceans and continents, linking the earliest microbes to the species alive today in an unbroken chain of descent stretching back billions of years.